Hello, this is Frank Lewis, Pastor Frank Lewis, and I want you to know that this is a very important program. This is one of the most important programs I've done because what's really you're going to learn about today is you're going to learn about the subject of identity. A lot of people think they know what identity is. We hear a lot about it in the church we go to, or the things we hear from a message or whatever. We always hear about having Christ's identity. Well, that would be awesome. That would be incredible, but it's not that easily done, is to say that's what you need to do. You got to know what identity is, and you need to know how it's formed, and that's going to be very, very much what we talk about today. And so we need to know that it is essential. It's very, very important for parents to know what identity is and how it's formed, because how you actually raise your children is going to create an identity, whether it's the right identity or it's going to be anything less than the right identity, which we've all fallen short of the glory of God. So, in fact, it will probably be, and I can almost guarantee it'll be less than ideal. But the main thing we want to get across today is, if you can understand, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. If you can understand how identity is formed, what is identity? Why does it matter so much that we have an identity that's rooted in an understanding that God gave us the identity instead of the perverted and distorted and damaged identity that's created by Satan? So, not created, he can't create anything. I need to define that properly. Not created by Satan, but distorted by Satan, because Satan can't create anything. So we're going to be looking into that today, and that is why I believe this may be one of the most important programs that I've done, and I want you to take notes, and I want you to be really getting a very good understanding of what identity is. Here's the thing. Identity is not a concept. It's the foundation of a person's entire life. In fact, identity is made up it affects so many things, because it's everything we believe, it's everything we choose, it's everything that, it drives every relationship, every boundary we set, every boundary or emotion that we feel, everything you fear, every dream you have, and every passion flows from the belief of who you are. And so it's very, very important to believe who you are is who God made you to be. But that gets distorted. And unfortunately, it gets very, very damaged by the plans of the devil. I'm not talking about the plans of the devil today. I'll be talking about that next week. So identity is the lens by which we interpret the world. More importantly, it's the lens by which we interpret ourselves. By the way we see ourselves is really our identity. And you really can only know and live out of who you believe you are. And this is true with your children, and I'm going to get further into that later in the program. It's your identity is damaged, distorted, or built on false beliefs. Every part of your life becomes misaligned and distorted and dysfunctional. That's a statement. Let me read that again. Let me give that to you again. If your identity is damaged, distorted, or built on false beliefs, every part of your life becomes misaligned and dysfunctional. If, on the other hand, your identity is healed and more whole, not damaged or distorted, but rooted in truth and aligned with God, your life will become more whole, grounded, and purposeful, and abundantly blessed. And that's what Jesus said in John 10:10, did he not? He said, I came to give you life and life more abundantly. Well, if we want the abundant life, we're going to have to have a more whole identity. This is why Satan attacks a child's identity in the womb, as a baby, as an infant, as a toddler, and a small child. And the reason he does that is because his goal and objective is to distort, damage, and cause the identity of a little child, baby, infant, to be less than, to be damaged to the point where they really can't see themselves like God sees them. If he can damage and distort a child's identity early on, it's early on because they can't reason. See, a little baby can't reason, a toddler can't reason, all the way up to a small child. Very difficult to reason, and I'm going to explain how and why this happens and how Satan does this, but we're going to first of all understand what identity is. So people that have their identities damaged by Satan, they grow up and what they believe about themselves is that it becomes their story and becomes the core part of what the heart repeats constantly. In other words, the core of a person is, the Bible says, is their heart. And so the core of belief of who we are is repeated constantly. If I believe I'm not enough, I'm going to act that out. I'm going to live that out every day. I'm going to live it out in relationships. I'm going to live it out in every part of my life, and that's going to cause problems. So we must understand that identity is and what it is and how it's formed. So the reason I'm teaching you this today, so you can help your children to have a more whole identity, to be seeing themselves more the way they were created to be. And that is not happening today, but that's one of the reasons I'm writing this book. And so we need godly, truthful, accurate identity if we're going to have an abundant life like Jesus promised. So identity answers three essential questions. Who am I? Am I worthy of love? And am I safe to be myself? Stop and think about that for a minute. You need to look at these three questions because my belief is that you have had these questions have been behind a lot of what you've struggled with, and it's going to be a problem if these are not, if you don't know who you are. My wife, who's in heaven, she never knew who she was. She knew how to take care of other people, but she couldn't take care of herself, and that may be your problem. If that's your problem, you know what? You've got a problem that needs to be healed, because your children are going to be raised by you and your spouse to wonder who they are. And it's very, very important that you understand that who am I needs to have value, purpose, and what I believe about myself, what you believe about yourself. The problem is it gets skewed. The next question is, am I worthy of love? Do I matter? Do I matter to someone? Do I matter to my spouse? Do I matter to my kids? Do I matter? That's a really big question. A lot of people don't really feel that they matter to anyone. And so this question is answered by understanding, do I have self-worth? Do I have self-value? Am I lovable? And do I feel like I belong? See, in my life, because of the way I was raised, I never felt like I belonged. I really didn't. My dad always made everything. The next one is, am I safe to be myself? In my house, I wasn't safe to be myself, and it may be the same thing that happens in your house. And so this includes, can you be vulnerable? Are you safe enough to be yourself so you can be vulnerable? and have confidence in who you are. I find so many people that I work with are just not able to know who they are. And they weren't raised in safety. They don't believe they're valuable enough to be loved, and they don't even know who they are. So identity is not an intellectual understanding, it's emotional. You may think with your head you know that you're valuable, but with your heart you say, I'm not good enough. Why? Because you believe things about yourself that aren't true. For example, you might say, I know God loves me. This is what happened to me. I read that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. I read all over the scriptures that God loved me, but I didn't believe it. You know why I didn't believe it? Because I didn't experience it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. I've heard so many people in my church. I had a church for 12 years, as I have said in other videos, and they told me that they actually trusted God. You know, I trust God. I hear people all the time. I work with people. They say I trust God, but the problem is that they really believe deep down God will punish them, and that was my story, and that it has been my story. And it's very hard way to live. If I can't trust God, then I'm going to trust myself, and we'll get into that further. And this is what I did. I believed I really wanted God I really wanted to trust God, but I couldn't because of the way my father treated me. And because of the way my father treated me, I just didn't believe that God was trustworthy. And you may be in the same situation. You may think you trust God, but what you're going to find out in the next couple of weeks, this week and next week, you're going to find out it's very difficult to trust God if you've been raised without a godly identity. If you don't have an identity that's trust God because of the way you were raised, and most of us don't, I'd say 99%, then you're going to have a hard time trusting God, and that is going to cause you problems. Why? Because if you can't trust God, you're going to trust yourself, and that's going to have very, very difficult consequences. Behavioral scientists tell us that we actually can't trust authority if authority has caused us any kind of pain, physical, emotional, or psychological, and God forbid, any kind of sexual abuse, any kind of neglect, any kind of not being emotionally available. So if that happens to us, and it happens to so many people, most all of the human race actually are set up by the devil to feel this way, then what we'll do is we can't trust any authority. If we can't trust any authority, then what happens is we're going to put the face of our fathers and mothers on authority, and God is the greatest authority, so now we've got the face of God, the face of our fathers and mothers on God. And this is what happened to me. This is exactly what happened to me. And what happens is that my identity was formed, as yours was, before I could even formulate thoughts about who I was. And so it's formed in the environment. And so that's the problem. If you haven't got an environment for your children that is a godly environment, or is more stable environment, or is that you're aware of all that I'm telling you today, then what's going to happen is they're going to absorb and they're going to internalize the environment. And if the environment is filled with fear and shame and guilt and condemnation and abuse, it's not going to. Your child is going to have a distorted and damaged identity. And so, what's really interesting is where identity comes from. Where do you think identity comes from? Well, identity comes from God. And God gave us all an identity. He said that He designed us And the scriptures back it up. In fact, David said, I am fearfully and wonderfully made in Psalm 139, verse 14. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And so David is expressing gratitude to God for making him that way and creating him with a person with intricately, creating him with an intricate design and valuing David. This means that our creation is purposeful. My being created by God is purposeful, intricate, and awe-inspiring. It was to David. If I think about it, it is to me. I didn't like me, though, for a long time, and I'll talk further about that. So when God created each human being, he defined their identity. Jeremiah 31:3 says, we are loved by God. Jeremiah 1:5 said, we are planned by God. We're not an accident. You're not an accident. Even if like you were like David, David was an illegitimate son. If you were illegitimate, look at David. He's a man after God's own heart. John 15:16 says, we are chosen by God. David was chosen by God. You're chosen by God. You have a destiny. And that's something that you need to realize. We are gifted by God. You're given gifts by God that only you have. We are created with a purpose. God has wired us with a plan and a purpose, a destiny, if you will, that he wants us to fulfill. The devil's then wants to take that destiny and that plan away and skew everything that God created. Why? Because he hates human beings. They're made in the image of God. And so that's his goal and objective. Everyone's identity was pure, intentional, and rooted in God's love, care, and divine purpose. That's the truth. We may not believe that, but that's the truth. That's what the scripture says. So your identity, however, was influenced by your earliest childhood experiences, and that's the problem. Just the same, your children will end up with their identity being skewed and distorted by you, the devil, other situations, and you won't even know why they're ending up the way they are, and they will end up with a life that is very difficult if you don't learn what I'm telling you. So that's why I'm doing it, is I want you to know that children internalize everything in their environment, and they internalize your identity. Your identity is actually supposed to be in God, and rooted in God and rooted in God's love, so you can pass that on to your children. So you can download that, a term we use now, download that into your children. But the devil and the way you were raised is going to be the way you raise your kids, and so what's going to end up happening is that you just download dysfunction and other problems into your child. And that's not God's best plan. So experiences are interpreted not logically, they are interpreted emotionally. Experiences become messages, messages become beliefs, beliefs become identity. And you need to know before your child ever speaks a word, makes a choice, forms a belief about the world, his or her heart, inner core, is shaped by the emotional environment. I've said it a number of times. There it is again. Your children don't just grow up in a home, they grow up in the atmosphere of your home. The atmosphere in your home influences them a long time before you and your spouse have anything to say to them. Before you teach them anything, they're already absorbing everything in your house. So what can happen is that through rejection, neglect, harshness, chaos, abandonment, criticism, favoritism, or emotional unpredictability, you're causing them to feel unsafe. So now that becomes a part of their identity. I'm not safe. When these things happen, your child will form beliefs about themselves and the world that feel true to them, but they're really not true. But they are true to them, so that's their truth. And these beliefs become the raw material that shapes their identity. And their identity is the compass that directs your child's destiny. So you see how important identity, you're beginning to see how important identity is. Your child's destiny is something they grow into. They have to have the right identity to get to the right destiny. God gives purpose to every life He creates, but whether your child walks into that purpose, please hear this, whether your child walks into that purpose depends largely on the identity they carry inside, what they believe about themselves. Identity is the steering wheel of destiny. And so God gives your child a destiny, but your child's identity and belief of who they are determines whether they will ever walk in it, whether they'll ever fulfill it, and whether they will get it done. Your child's identity not only determines whether they reach their destiny, it also influences how they relate to other people, the mate they choose, and the work they choose to do. Your child or children will grow up to be adults, and when they do, every relationship they have will be affected by their identity. Their friendships, their marriage, their parenting, children, their church, community, their work, relationships, and even how they relate to God will always all be affected by what they believe about themselves. Their identity is not what they say they are. On the surface, it's the core beliefs that tell them how much they matter, whether they belong, whether they are safe, what they deserve, and how people see them, and what they need to do to stay connected emotionally. Your children's identity shapes everything about how they relate to people. Their identity as adults determines whether they are authentic and honest. That's a big problem in our world by now. Vulnerable and transparent, or armored with defenses, or they act like they're invisible. The identity your children take into adulthood affects all their relationships. And I want you to know that identity is invisible. It's the architect behind romantic attraction. It's the reason why your child is going to pick the woman that he picks. The truth is, people don't fall in love based on what is emotionally healthy. Isn't that a shame? People don't choose emotional, healthy spouses or mates, if you will. They fall in love with people based on dysfunction they experienced as a child. The romantic attraction is based on what is familiar. Get this. Oh, this is so important. Familiarity comes from each person, each child, your child, internalized in their dysfunctional family. Identity becomes the filter through which each person interprets love, attraction, safety, and connection. When you believe what you believe will determine who you believe you can be loved by. So that's a big problem. People marry the wrong people, and then they end up with a life of real problems. Identity formed by your child and your spouse will affect every relationship they ever have and the mate they choose. And when your child becomes an adult, their identity and what they believe about themselves determines what they believe they're capable of and what kind of career are they going to choose. Believe it or not, your identity of your child will determine much more than education, much more than their interests, okay, will determine what kind of job they do. And so most people think they choose a career based on interest, education, and opportunity. It's not true. For the most part, the truth is they choose their work they do based on emotional survival patterns, unconscious beliefs, that's false beliefs, childhood wounds, and the internal beliefs that came in their childhood, which was formed in your home. And so that's why I'm doing this, so you can have a better result for your children. You will parent out of your identity and what you believe about yourself. If you feel unworthy, you struggle to love. If you feel invisible, you're emotionally unavailable. And if you feel unsafe, you project fear on your children. And so parents need to get this. It's very, very important. Your emotional life is built on internal beliefs. The most important reason that you need to be healed, however, is that your identity has to correspond with God. If you don't have a belief in the reality that what you believe about yourself is what you believe about God, I'm telling you right now, it's true. What you believe about yourself is what you believe about God. So if you believe that you're not enough, then you'll believe that God can't help you. If you believe that God is, like I did, if you believe that God is a punisher, my father was a punisher, so I believe God was a punisher. And so we get these views of God that are not accurate. And if we have learned that God is going to be distant because our parents were neglectful or emotionally unavailable, that's not going to work well. So now you know how important identity is. I hope you will take this information and realize, oh my gosh, I've got to get my identity healed so I can download a more godly identity, raise more emotionally healthy children so that they don't have to go through everything I've been through, everything you've been through, and they don't have to suffer. I see so many people, and I work with so many people, and they are suffering. And the reason they're suffering is because parents didn't become healthy enough to cause them to believe things about themselves that were more godly and more rooted in the God's love. And so you have an opportunity to change that forever for your children. And I want you to take that opportunity, be blessed, and know that God gave us what we need.